How are Australia's Pollies dodging the advertising blackout in the lead up to the election?
And how is Google helping us dodge listening to dodgy hold music? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. Hey there, welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists to dive into the big tech stories of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and this week I'm not joined as always by Alex Kidman, a man who's resting his croaky voice so he's ready to shout at the television on Saturday night. So, welcome to Vertical Hold Behind the Supply Chain News. Yes, finally. Oh, maybe not. He'll kill me. I guess we better break the emergency glass instead and get out the emergency Kidman. It's Binder's editor-in-chief, Angus Kidman. Gus, who's your hot tip to win the prize seat of Dunny on the Wold this weekend?
Well, I'm seeing a shock move happening there. I think that the seat is going to go to Colin the Dashhund, and I think we can all agree that if we had a Dashhund to vote for in our electorate, we would go for that. But can I also point out, Adam, that an election is basically supply chain management for politicians, so I think you've done it.
True. Nice. Very happy with that. So we're also joined for this week's election special by the Iron Lady of Tech, News Corp's national tech editor, Jen Dudley-Nicholson. Jen, are you ready to head out for a democracy sausage this weekend?
I think that's probably the best thing I'll find at any of these polling booths. So yeah, sure. Maybe a cake stall.
Oh yeah, can't go wrong with a cake stall. So Jen's joining us this week to look at how Australia's politicians continue to throw ridiculous amounts of advertising dollars at social media in the run-up to this weekend's election. But first, Jen, you've been living the dream recently of escaping hold music hell. How did you manage it?
Yeah, by total accident. And I absolutely love this. And so I can recommend it to anybody who has a Google phone. So essentially, I had a terrible experience with Australia Post. So shout out to those guys who just didn't deliver things. And so I got on the phone. I was offered a 30 minutes of on hold music, which is, again, everybody's dream. And when I was doing this, I did this from a Google phone, and it said, "Do you want to try this beta software called Hold for Me?" Which is the best use of AI that I've seen, because essentially it has a listen for you. And so you can completely mute your phone. This thing goes through and it tells you if music's playing. It transcribes what it thinks it's saying when there's like a recorded message of, you could just go to a post office instead of, listening and waiting on hold. No, I can't. Shut up.
You could just deliver my bloody parcel is what you want to say in return.
That would have been great. But I mean, the next best thing to actually having my parcel delivered was having this Google Pixel phone actually do all of the hard work for me. It was amazing.
So what did it do?
So it basically, I was able to silence my phone. I didn't have to listen to any of the music or the recordings. It just gave me an update. And then this is so funny because there's a few other Google features like this as well. But when I went back to it, it said, "Okay, I'm just reintroducing the caller to you." And so it actually said something to them. So, okay, you've been placed on hold. We're about to ready to talk to you now, which I think is hilarious and fantastic.
I'm loving that, like, you ran into this accidentally, because this feature's been alive in the US, I think, since 2020. And when I heard that you'd had a go at it, I assumed that because you are the most powerful woman in Australian technology journalism, that you'd been given special early access. But it seems like you just happened to fluke into it by using the right phone for the right annoying phone call.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a few of these things have been tested in America before they've come to us. Like there was one, I remember this was years ago, they announced this where they were going to be able to place like a hair appointment for you. And like Google was going to be able to do all of this hard work. And I think that was tested overseas as well, but didn't necessarily come to us. There's another one too where you can put people on hold and it will actually tell the person that, they've been put on hold. And kind of make announcements like that you've got a personal assistant on your phone. And it's hilarious.
So this is Google Duplex that we saw them showing off at Google I/O 3 or 4 years ago now, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. And we didn't really get the full taste of it. I think there was a bit of a reaction that
Yeah.
people thought maybe it was too creepy.
Well, it freaks people out when they demonstrated it on stage because it basically passed the Turing test. It was you'd ring up to book a hairdresser's appointment, and the hairdresser would answer the phone, and this artificial voice would talk to the person, but it would deliberately and and hesitate and do all the things that a normal person does in speech. And the people on the other end had no idea they were talking to a machine, and it freaked people out a little bit.
I mean, there's useful features, and then there's like things that go too close to the creepy line,
Mm.
and it's a really sort of delicate balancing act that they have to do. But the on hold music, especially in this age where suddenly, I don't know, accessing a call center for some companies is basically like camping out in front of an Apple store used to be. I think it's a fantastic feature.
Cough, cough, Qantas, cough, cough. I think this is where we can start with that one.
I was
This
going to
is
say,
how we can
Gus,
test it.
what else should this be applied to, Gus?
Well, I mean, I think I'm all for having that Turing test version, but I'm just excited by the notion that I don't have to listen to the endless invocations of your call is important to us, but did you know you can go online that Jen alluded to earlier? That is so frustrating. Believe me, if I could do this online, I'd have done it. I would not be hanging around waiting to talk to your call center. So I just think if they can get it to work reliably, if they've managed to sort out the accent, which is normally the reason why any voice related features Australia gets from Google 3 years after, if it was Amazon, it would be 6 years after. But with Google, it's a little bit quicker. So I like the idea that it can actively do this, that it sort of displays little cards that tells you what's going on as it's going through. So you do know if they're actually trying to talk to you. So I'd like to see this, more widely adopted basically. And I guess I'd like Google to unlock it and not just have it on Pixel. I've moved on to Pixel as my main phone recently. So I need to try this out. I'm almost tempted to ring Qantas just to see if it happens. Not quite that tempting because that is a long wait, but I'd love to see it rolled out more broadly onto Android generally because it does feel at the moment like it's a little bit one of those Pixel exclusives.
Have we seen them roll out this technology beyond Pixel? Have Google's got a habit of keeping some stuff just to their Pixel phones?
They have, and I mean, another feature that I really enjoy is their recorder feature, and just the way that it can transcribe interviews so well. I mean, other companies have got various kind of versions of that, but I think Google does it really well, and that's probably why they want to keep it on their platform and in their particular walled garden. And this one being in beta as well, I think is probably a reason why they're going to say that it has to remain on Pixel phones for now. There's no indication that it's going to roll out more widely. But next time I call Centrelink, you've got to believe that I'm going to call them on a Pixel phone.
I'd be interested to know how it handles it if the hold music you're listening to is live radio with a DJ talkback radio or something like that. Because I had an experience a long time ago now when I worked at the paper. I was on hold listening to live radio, and they're playing music and they come back from a song and the DJ says, and now we're going to go to a caller, and there's nothing. There's dead air. And he's going, hello. And then the DJ's going, hello. And I'm thinking, oh, this dickhead doesn't know that he's on the air. Like he's just waiting for them to answer the call. Again, hello. Hang on, maybe I'm the dickhead. Yes, it turns out that as he's thrown to the call, the person who I was on hold with picked up the call and said hello. And I thought I was still listening to the DJ on the radio. So I'm sitting there like an idiot, being quiet, laughing at the idiot on the other end who doesn't know that he's actually being spoken to. I'd be interested to see if we
That's
could
a
pop that.
specific use case scenario, I
It
think.
is a specific use case scenario, but I'd be interested to see how it handled it.
My educated guess is that they won't be doing live radio on call so much because radio can't make money anywhere else. So they charge for that stuff now. If you want to
True.
have live radio happening on your whole music, you're probably paying for it. So that's why everybody has gone for like jazzy versions of Baby Elephant Walk instead.
And they're really, as you mentioned before, like those really annoying, have you tried the website things? They're so perky and it just keeps going. I really liked, Google's version of, your call is important to us. I can see it right there. Good. I don't have to hear it. Good.
And also, it doesn't matter what time of day or night you ring, we're experiencing high call volumes at the moment. Bullshit. You've just put that on the recording 24/7. So I will go, oh, I guess it must be a busy time. Apparently at 4 o'clock in the morning, they're still experiencing a high volume of calls.
Hi for 4 a.m. in the morning, maybe, but no.
Now, I'm the Apple ignorant Kidman. Is there any equivalent of this that exists in the iPhone universe? Because Apple's big on services. We're all old enough to remember that actually the original selling point for the first iPhone was intelligent voicemail, a feature which barely ever made it to Australia. But is there anything kind of mooted that might happen in the iOS universe that would offer similar features?
I think the closest thing I can think of, because with the accessibility features, I know that they're bringing in live captions to calls, and so potentially you could do something around that. But I haven't seen anything that kind of mimics this on hold feature. And I think Apple, unlike Google, is a bit more reticent to test out these sorts of like AI features without having really proven themselves first. I'm not saying they couldn't do it. I'm just saying that Google's probably the most likely to do it first.
So, Jen, the big day is almost here, and which is exciting if you care about politics, and also exciting if you don't, because it's almost over.
It's been so long.
So there's this rule about advertising before the election. There's an election advertising blackout, but it doesn't really work the way it's supposed to, does it?
It doesn't. I mean, it was created a long time ago, and there's you can definitely see that. So essentially, this pre-election advertising blackout happens. It's up until the Wednesday before the election, which happens on a Saturday. And essentially, the rule is that you can't have political advertising on television broadcasts or on radio broadcasts anymore. But there's a few other bits of media around that can actually still have election advertising on it, I think you'll find. And a lot of them are getting an awful lot of money spent on them this year. YouTube, web search ads, Facebook ads, all around the place. We're seeing these things pop up, and the bucket continues, even though there's an advertising blackout on.
Well, yes, because that law was introduced in 1992. So I think the only weird media that they forgot to include is maybe they should have been covering off teletext advertising. Like that might have actually been a problem back in the day. But yeah, and we have not, so there's no changes have been made in the 30 odd years since to say, hey, advertising's moved on. Maybe we could stop irritating people in other ways. And I don't think it would matter who was in power. It doesn't seem likely that any political party will change those particular rules. So we are going to be stuck right up until voting closes on that Saturday at 6 p.m. in each state. If you go into your Facebook feed or your YouTube feed, I think that's at your peril, because you're going to see some very annoying advertising that you've already been seeing for the past 6 weeks.
So, Jen, who's throwing money at social media? Where are they throwing it at?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. And I talked to an expert about this who was saying, social media is a really interesting way to see exactly where this stuff is being targeted at. And also what strategy they actually are going to take, as opposed to the ones that, pundits think they're going to take beforehand. So Clive, you can't get past Clive. He's apparently spent more than $18 million now on YouTube ads. So if he's coming up all the time on your YouTube feed, it's not you. You're not being targeted particularly. He's targeting so many people so often. And that was obviously, he decided that that's where his audience was, and so that's where he's poured in a lot of his money. Labor has spent a surprising amount of money. I didn't know that they had coffers quite this large on Facebook ads, because that's where they decided they really needed to focus on. And they have spent a lot on YouTube ads as well. But on Facebook, they've really ramped it up. They're spending more than $100,000 a day now, 140 something thousand dollars in the past day, for example, just on Facebook ads. And the Liberal Party, I'm a bit surprised by this as well, have spent way less. So it used to be about sort of a quarter of the spend. Now it's become even less. They haven't ramped up in the same way that Labor has, but they've got a lot more negative. So we've seen a lot of, Albanese dressed up as Gollum and and various characters, and a lot of memes have come into there. A lot of stuff around, fake Gumtree ads looking for an economic advisor. So they're sort of appealing to a different audience, but potentially. And a lot of their stuff has been more targeted. So if you look at, especially the information that you can get from the Google Ad Transparency Report, you'll see that they're really targeting sort of individual seats with their spending, which has been a really interesting strategy. And I guess we'll just see whether kind of a wide target or smaller targets work.
Well, it does. It makes sense that Facebook and YouTube are appealing when they can do that targeting, because we know that these elections are typically won and lost on the handful of swing seats, and that so many seats, it doesn't really matter. They know what the outcome's going to be. And previously with television advertising, it's pretty broad brush. Like at best, you can maybe target, if you're in a regional area, you can target an electorate. I've been traveling around regional New South Wales, and it's interesting to see how even TV advertising is focused in a way that you would never see if you're in a capital city. But so it seems like there's some evidence of that, is there, Jen? That like they really are going right. Let's go for these seats we can win, where we think we've got a chance of stealing people, rather than trying to
Yeah.
go for absolutely everybody.
Absolutely. And like with Labor, they've done a lot more ads that are kind of across the entire country. And they have targeted some places, but sort of broad brush. Whereas some of the Liberal ads on YouTube I've seen, like if you have a look at the boundaries of like the electoral map, you can actually pick out which ones they are. And so if you live in the top half of Tasmania, you're probably having a really rough time online right now. And I've got to say, this has been the best ad for getting a YouTube premium subscription so that you can just cut out all of the ads because there's just been so many and so much spending on this stuff.
TikTok is one that hasn't come up. Now, I'm going to admit that I don't use TikTok, but do they have advertising on TikTok? Why are they not? Do they not care about the kids?
They care very much about the kids because they make a lot of money out of those kids. And apparently people doing Lizzo dances over and over. Um, TikTok is an interesting one because, like Twitter, they don't have political advertising on there. However, what they do have is a lot of political content. And I've certainly seen, in this election, Scott Morrison is on there. However, he's massively shut down his account. So you can't do, duets with him. You can't sort of, comment on his stuff. You can't even leave comments and that sort of thing. However, there's been a lot of content on there just created by regular folks who are ranting about people in their election, who are sort of putting up videos of signs being defaced, who are defacing signs themselves, who are actually even doing some really smart commentary on what's happening in the sort of the political campaign so far. So it's a real mix of things. There's definitely a lot on there. However, they just have to rely on going viral instead of actually paying to be there.
Yeah, all the research I'd seen that talked around TikTok kind of said that it actually felt a bit more like participatory democracy, where lots of people are able to maybe get a voice in it. Whereas Facebook, which wants all the advertising money, and YouTube, which is sort of very slick in this area, has become, oh, I'm just being bombarded by the main voices. And the odds of you are actually seeing a standalone person doing a commentary video on the election are really, really low on YouTube, whereas they're quite high on TikTok, and with the TikTok algorithm being the wonderful fun beast it is. If you've watched a couple of those, you probably will have spent 6 weeks seeing lots and lots of versions of that happening.
Thinking about what we already know about influencers, surely there are influencers in the political space. Some of that so-called real people grassroots stuff would not be, would it?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I know that there was a case in the last election where I think nano influencers or micro influencers, whatever you want to call them, were actually paid after the election blackout to kind of influence their followers and say, I'm voting for so and this is why, without saying, and they gave me a big bucket of cash.
Hmm.
So I don't know if we are going to see as much of that this time. Certainly, I don't think that was disclosed terribly well last time. If they're going to start reforming the blackout rules, they should definitely start reforming the transparency rules. Because one thing I've noticed in all this, like I've been able to get a lot of information about who's advertising where, and I mean it's weird to be giving them credit, but Facebook and Google actually deserve a lot of credit for making this stuff a bit more transparent than I would have expected it to be. And you can definitely, see where, as I say, that spending is and who's doing it and even the content of those ads. Whereas the political parties are not that forthcoming about what they're actually doing.
No, they like to keep it, to the bare minimum. Let's say just very quickly at the end of the thing, this was paid for by the Liberal Party campaign. Like that's all they ever wanted to do at the end of a video ad to make it happen. Of course, it keeps striking me there's an appealing irony about the idea that, okay, well, on the one hand, yes, we can keep advertising it for a political party right up until the election. On the other hand, we know the trend for at least the last 3 elections has been that people vote earlier and earlier. We saw a massive percentage of pre-poll and postal voting at the previous election. All the expectations are that this one's going to be even higher, especially once you throw in some paranoia and go, well, blimey, what if I plan to vote on election day, but then I get pulled up with COVID? So I quite like the idea that they might have spent a lot of money on social media, and actually it won't make much difference because a huge percentage of people made up their mind before they were going to see that last 3 days blitz of advertising that they thought they'd snuck in.
Absolutely, and we saw today that if you happen to have caught COVID before Tuesday at 5 p.m., then there's a bit of a window where you still have to be in isolation, but you can't actually do the telephone voting. And I feel so sorry for those people because it's a roll of the dice whether you get it or not and when you exactly get it. So And like you said, with pre-poll voting, I think there's been more than 3 million people who've cast a ballot, and that was as of yesterday, which is a lot of the population. And I just assume they're going to make their democracy sausages at home.
Well, that's the thing. I haven't voted at an election booth on election day for more than a decade. And I think the reason why is my wife and I were walking along the street. I think we dropped the car off at the mechanic and we were walking home and we walked past the pre-polling booth. And my wife said, "Oh, we can vote now." And I'm like, "What do you mean now? You've got to vote on election day. Like, where's my democracy sausage?" And so we did it. And I thought, "Oh, that was easy." And so now we've done it every time. And we've actually had to queue, even if you're voting, like anytime this week, if you'd gone to one of those pre-polling places, you would be queuing up. But this year is my son's first chance to vote, and he demands his democracy sausage. So we're actually going to go to a polling station for the first time in a long time, but they better have good sausages.
Well, you're a fiendish barbecuer, Adam, so I know that your standards for
True.
democracy sausage will be very high.
Very high.
I actually quite like the experience of it. I'm silent on the roll, so I've been doing sort of postal votes as well for a long time. But sometimes I actually fill it all out. And by the way, the Senate sheet is huge this year. Good luck voting below the line. I did it, but it took a while.
Oh, I do. I'm the same as you, Jen. I have to do every number below the line. Like, I just feel like it's my duty to put the people I really dislike right at the end. So, yeah, it takes a long time.
It does. There's more than 70 spots, I think, in both Queensland and New South Wales. But sometimes I'll fill that out. And you can, if you want, rather than post it, just take it into a booth and hand it in. So you still get the full experience of being among the people, so to speak, if that's what you're into, and among the democracy sausages. But what you raised about sort of the pre-poll stuff, I think it was May 9 when people could actually, start pre-poll voting, and postal voting sort of came into play before that. So I think we did see some advertising spending sort of ramp up towards that point. I mean, I want to say it's been a short campaign, being 6 weeks, but it feels like the longest time in the world. However, over that entire period, we have seen a lot of money go into the coffers of these tech giants. So they're doing really well out of it too.
Well, the way I use social media and television and radio, which is not much, practically none of this gets to me. So the only political advertising I've seen is from Clive Palmer because he buys billboards around here. Like even where I live in the safest of safest Labor. Bill Shorten is my local guy. All right, that's how safe my Labor seat is. Right, and Clive still got billboards up in my area, but I noticed that he's making claims that I don't know if he can actually pull off. Things like he wants to say that there will be guaranteed when you buy a house, you get 3% interest rate locked in for 5 years. Now, there's debate as to whether he even has apparently using the power of the Constitution. Like, I don't even know if he can pull it off.
It was a complete castle moment. It was the vibe of the Constitution. We were going to be able to. No, you absolutely can't. I mean, we dug into this at Finder a bit because home loans are kind of one of our day-to-day jam. And the reality is, if they told the banks you can't charge more than 3% for home loans, lots of banks would just stop giving home loans. Like, it's as simple as that. So it's just not going to happen. So.
But in the electoral laws, is there any kind of fact checking, or you have to back yourself? Like, can they, in those attack ads, can they come out and say whatever they want about each other? Or can someone like Clive Palmer say that he's going to, cure cancer because you can't prove him wrong?
This is weird, but I guess they could say those things because, there's no truth in advertising laws as it pertains to political advertising. It was as if the politicians actually set up those laws themselves. Weirdly. So technically there doesn't. I think you could probably defame people in advertisements and they could take legal action against that. So maybe you can't just say, he's an absolute goose, for example. But we saw, regrettably today, more United Australia Party text messages go out, making some kind of almost misspelt, weirdly sort of punctuated claims about the Labor and the Liberal Party handing over control of the entire federal health department to China and the World Health Organization. Now, I don't mean to blow your minds, but that is also not true. And
because everyone knows it's the Illuminati.
Right. I mean, maybe there's too many letters to put that in a text. I don't know. But the Australian Electoral Commission, and this is really interesting because they've been quite forthright this election, really sort of out there and buying their own Facebook ads as well, and really entertaining on social media. They actually say that, technically, yes, that is allowable because they have attributed that to the United Australia Party, and they've got a link there that goes to their site, so people can work out where it's from and they can make their own decision. Now, I would say if you're making a decision based on that text message, please get some help. It's absolutely misleading in the worst possible way, but at least it's not misleading in a believable way, because I just don't know who's buying into that.
But it underscores that also a lot of these tactics that we're seeing used on social media in this election are imported wholesale from other countries, because this ridiculous message around the World Health Organization, exactly the same thing is being spread in the US right now. It's big in a lot of right-wing media. So they literally just take the message and change the country and back it comes in. So we're seeing a globalization of sneaky things that you can do in those messages. And the text messages thing also underscores that, like, we're not going to see any of these laws change, because under the laws around text message advertising, politicians don't have to give you an opt-out. Unlike everybody else who sends out SMS or email stuff, politicians are exempt from that. And so since they haven't changed that for the past 25 years, you can't imagine they're ever going to make any meaningful changes to online advertising either.
There's been a few big scare campaigns like the Mediscare campaign. Do you think it'll ever get to the point where at least one of the major political parties, when they're in power, will go, right, it's time to clean this up?
Well, it's interesting because we've seen scare campaigns from both the major parties, I think. So we saw Mediscare, obviously, which did what it needed to do, I suppose, even though it was also misleading. I think we also saw issues around the retirement tax, as it was called, which wasn't actually a retirement tax, and I think retirees were actually excluded from what they were referring to, and it also wasn't a tax; it was a loophole that was being closed. So I think that normally, every now and again, you do get these sort of scare campaigns. It would be nice to see them stomped out, but again, politicians are in charge of the laws, and I think all sides kind of enjoy protecting their little patch and protecting their campaigns. I'd love to see the Spam Act change so that the text messages didn't come through, because it's one thing to have an annoying ad on your television, and it's another thing when your pocket keeps vibrating because some rich dude wants to send you misleading messages.
Well, that just about wraps it up for our election special episode of Vertical Hold. Iron Lady Jen, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So, Jen, it's fallen upon me this week to hit you with the Vertical Hold 3 questions of doom with a slight spin on it. Tell me, where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And the big contentious question of this week, if you were declared leader of Australia or even the world, what would your title be?
Oh, see, I mean, it's hard to go past Supreme Leader, but I think that's been done before. Maybe just like Prime Ministeress. I think maybe it needs to change a little bit for the gender, and men can take that on when they follow me up. You can find me on Twitter a lot under @JenDudley, and you can find a lot of my work on the News Corp mastheads at Daily Telegraph, Courier Mail, Herald Sun, those sorts of places.
Perfect. And myself, I've always been partial to El Presidente.
I like it. It's subtle, but I like it.
Viva El Presidente!
And a big thanks to Grand Poobah Angus for joining us again this week.
No worries.
And as always, you can catch us online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, at verticalhold.com.au, or the Vertical Hold Facebook page. And thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. Don't forget to tell your friends about us and help us spread the good word in 2022. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. I hate him. He drinks like a fish.
He's got no talent.
Alex who?